Great, it's great to be here, and what I want to do today is share with you some experience that I've had in the last few years building some technology to help the world of sports. And even if you're not an athlete yourself or a fan, I think there are a lot of lessons that you can learn from this experience in your own software architecture adventures. So a little bit about myself. You mentioned all the baseball teams. Most of those are baseball teams. That's why my Twitter handle is Science Baseball. And so what I do with baseball teams is actually measurement. And we try to apply a lot of the same SEI and practical software measurement techniques to try to improve athletic performance, but also on the business side to try to optimize their business operations. So the way this story goes is through my work with baseball teams, I actually had the pleasure of meeting the director of umpire safety for Major League Baseball. And I was asking myself, why would this position exist? This is a full-time person who just worries about the safety of umpires. Well, it turns out umpires suffer concussions. And just to give you some context for those of you who may not know baseball, the umpire is the person who is standing behind the catcher. And the catcher is the person who's supposed to be catching the ball that's being thrown by the pitcher at about 90 to, in some cases, up to 100 miles an hour. So this is a baseball about 5 ounces in weight, and that's being launched about 60 feet distance. And the catcher is supposed to catch it with their glove. But sometimes the catcher misses. And the umpire, who has a face mask on, sometimes gets hit in the face, unprotected. Their hands are typically to their side, and they don't have any protection other than the face mask. And when this happens, they get a mild concussion. And in some cases, it's even worse. So the last thing you want in a baseball game is for the umpire to not be able to see well, because they already have problems making the right call. But what happens is if they get hit in the face and they get a little bit of a concussion, it's harder for them to orient and to judge things that are happening very quickly. So that's the first time that I really learned about concussions in sports. Fast forward a couple years, and I actually kind of came across some colleagues at the University of Arizona who were working on improving concussions in football. And that's when around the time the movie Concussion came out, if many of you have maybe heard of it or seen it. And so it was a very public topic because the National Football League here in the United States was hiding a lot of the research that was showing that concussions were dangerous for football players. That eventually got resolved in the courts, and there was a settlement close to $1 billion that the NFL had to pay for players' education and research to try to address this issue of concussions. But essentially, what we developed is a tool to try to help athletes understand what concussions look like. Because the way to educate somebody about a concussion, well, you can either give them a concussion, which is not a great alternative, or you can have them experience a concussion virtually, right? So this is what I'm going to show today. Now, the image behind me, this is actually a real capture of a real football stadium at the University of Arizona in Tucson, where I live and work. And what we did is we took a bunch of drones and a bunch of cameras, and we digitized the entire stadium and created a 360-degree virtual environment. And then this scenario of getting a concussion exists in this environment. And about halfway through the presentation, I'm going to show you the app. I'm actually going to put it on myself. I'm going to give myself some concussions virtually. And then you're going to see what a football player may see when they get hit in the head by another player. Okay? So I'm going to start with the takeaways because I think as I go through the presentation, you're going to see how I highlight these points. So the first point on the top left is the idea of concussions as a public health problem. Now, to categorize something as a public health problem, it just has to fit a few very simple criteria. Number one, it has to affect a lot of people. But number two, it has to affect a variety of people, not just a subset of the population. And I'm going to show you some data that I think will support that point. The second takeaway on the top right is the involvement of end users. So you would think if we're building an app for football players, we got football players involved. That's correct, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more about their story. The third point in the middle is treating this as a socio-technical system. And what I mean by that is a system where you're not just looking at the technology, but you're also looking at the human using the technology. And that perspective helped us, I think, design a slightly better solution. The fourth point on the bottom left is the idea of realism. So anytime you're building a virtual reality app, you're always worried about, is this thing real enough? Is it believable enough that it's going to make an impact on somebody? And so I'm going to talk about some of the design challenges for that. And last but not least, one of my favorite topics in design is unintended consequences. Things that we didn't know were going to happen that actually we're all fortunate because they led to some new opportunities, but they taught us a lot about how football players think and how they make decisions. So a little bit of data just to give you some context. And by the way, does anybody recognize which helmet is being used here from which team? Okay, all right, Cleveland Browns. So I apologize in advance for Browns fans. This is going to be a painful presentation for you. Yeah, you're used to it. Can't win any games. So, and I also, for our friends who don't live in the United States, I do say football, and I mean American football, not the other game that's where you kick the ball with your foot. This is the football where you handle the ball with your hands. Okay? Hand football should be called. So a little bit of data. On the left, you'll see that the NCAA released a study that says, hey, there are tens of thousands of concussions and about a third of them occur in football. Okay, that probably doesn't surprise anybody. But then they teamed up with the US military because service members, soldiers, and from all services, Marines, Navy, Air Force, there are 300,000 instances of brain injury. Now, they don't always call it concussions in the military. Sometimes they call it TBI, traumatic brain injury. We'll talk about that as well. But you'll see there's 100-fold difference between the number of concussions in athletics and the number of concussions in the military. So what happened is the National Collegiate Athletics Association, the governing body for college sports in the US, got together with the Department of Defense and they started this initiative called Mind Matters. And what they did is put out a call for proposals for educational and research ideas that would help resolve this issue of concussions. And it's a multi-dimensional issue. It's not just that there are a lot of them, but it's primarily that student athletes and soldiers don't report concussions when they do get them. Okay, so let's just start with that basic issue is, if somebody gets a concussion, do we ever know about it? There's a lot of social stigma against reporting concussions because you want to be a useful and contributor of the team. So you don't want to necessarily just be asked to put to the sideline because you got hit in the head. Okay, so there's a social stigma against that. But what I did with my team of a physician and a neuroscientist at U of A, we got together, we put a proposal together for this Mind Matters Challenge. We got some funding from the NCAA. So I'm going to show you a short, about a 60-second video that summarizes the app, and then I'm going to go into some of the details about it. And the app is called Brain Gains. I'm going to explain the name a little bit later.
Every year, athletes suffer concussions, but remain unaware because they don't recognize the symptoms. Traditional means of educating athletes about concussions are inadequate. Brain Gains turns concussion education into a first-person experience through virtual reality gaming. Brain Gains combines sports medicine, neuroscience, and behavioral science with computer engineering to take advantage of virtual reality engines available on smartphones already in the hands of every athlete. Brain Gains has created a powerful experience for athletes to recognize concussion symptoms and begin a concussion discussion with their teammates, trainers, coaches, and families.
Okay, so I use the term concussion a lot. Let me define what it is. Concussion is when you get hit in the head and your brain rattles inside your skull. In some cases, it could be a mild concussion, just something that may make you dizzy for a few seconds. In other instances, it may cause permanent damage. Okay, so this is the case for why this is a public health problem, because it doesn't just happen in football. So I'll show you a little bit of data about other sports. If you heard of the movie Concussion with Will Smith, they talk about chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And this is the more long-term permanent brain damage that happens, that's been documented in the National Football League. And I'll talk a little bit more about that story, but essentially the takeaway from that film is that this is a controversial topic that doesn't necessarily benefit pro sports, and it damages athletes quite a bit. So there's been a lot of policy change. I'll talk about some of the rules that have changed in the NFL in particular to make that sport safer. So now let's talk about symptoms. So say you get a concussion for whatever reason. Maybe you slip and fall in the bathroom. Maybe you are in a car accident, or maybe you play football. There are a lot of different symptoms that you can get. And the interesting thing is that it's a complex medical condition. Just because you and I maybe get hit in the head in the same way, we might experience different symptoms just because of the way our brains work. So some of these may be blurred vision, double vision. Some of them may be vomiting. Some of them may be depression or just a headache, right? So they can vary significantly. And so one of the things that we wanted to try to understand is which of these symptoms make the most sense to simulate in virtual reality. Because there are some, like vomiting, that we don't want to induce on anybody, right? But there are others that are much easier, like blurred vision. We can do that. We can simulate that in virtual reality and give somebody that experience so that at least they can associate getting hit to that particular symptom. So again, if you fly home and have an opportunity for about a 2-hour window of entertainment, this is a really good movie. And Will Smith on the right, and on the left is Dr. Bennett Omalu, and he was the physician at the medical center in Pittsburgh, actually, another connection to SEI. They brought in Mike Webster, a football player for the Steelers, after he had committed suicide, and he examined his brain. And what he found was some permanent damage, which eventually became documented as the CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And this sort of started his analysis of brains of football players, and they found these patterns, this consistent type of damage, which was then documented in the journal, medical journal, which is then the National Football League tried to dampen that message, and the movie is about that controversy. So let me talk about one of the visual reactions you may see when somebody gets a concussion. This is called the fencing response. When somebody gets hit and their brain shuts down, you get this response where their arms just come straight out, or sometimes extended in front of their bodies. I'm actually going to show you, again, I apologize for the Cleveland Browns fans, but this is another instance where your team got knocked in the head pretty good, but I want at least you to see one particular hit. It's not too violent, there's no blood, but I want you to see the way that this particular player's head rotates as he gets hit. And so one of the things that is the most dangerous in a football game, an American football game, is the punt return. The punt return is where the team that's playing defense kicks the ball to the team playing offense, and there's a receiver or a punt returner that catches the ball. And this is the gentleman who got hit in the head. He catches the ball, and his job is to run in the opposite direction, or the direction towards the opposite goal, and try to get a touchdown. Okay, but the dangerous thing is he's running full speed, and so is the other team. Right, and that's when you get the head-on-head collision. So what they've tried to outlaw in football is the helmet-to-helmet contact. But this is what you're going to see in this particular example.
On the 26, he'll get a shot at it. Whoa! Helmet's out, ball's out. Oh my! And Josh Cribbs is probably out.
So look at his arms as soon as he falls to the ground.
Cox
You see
made
the
the
fencing
tackle.
response.
And let's hope that Cribbs is okay.
Morgan Cox is the long snapper, 46. The second hit that comes in, though, is the one that knocks the helmet off from the right-hand side. Cox was the primary. Now, watch from the left here. That's Ellerby, 59. That's the hit that got him. And remember, folks, and I know everybody's saying forearm to the helmet. He's not a defenseless player. He's a punt returner with the ball in his hands. This is not a defenseless player situation. All we really care about right now is his health.
Okay, so unfortunately, this particular player never scored a touchdown again in his life. He played only about 2 seasons after this, and then his career ended. This was a pretty severe concussion. Let me talk a little bit about the Concussion Protocol, because that informs why we built the app the way we did. So the way that the Concussion Protocol works in the National Football League is before the season begins, all the players go through a baseline test. Things like reaction time, balance, and they collect all this information so that in the case that there's a suspected concussion during the season, they compare the baseline to post-concussion to see if there's any change in their reaction time or balance. Then they can make a judgment about whether there's an impact physically on the player. So beyond the baseline that happens preseason, there's actually a protocol during the game. So the first step in that protocol is whenever they think that a player has had a concussion, they suspect that they've had a concussion, they remove them from the field immediately. Okay? And if your helmet comes off, you also get removed from the field automatically. Then there are two physicians who make the judgment about whether you should stay or not. The team physician for one of the teams, and then an independent person called the unaffiliated neurotrauma consultant. This is a person who doesn't work for either of the teams, but is able to make a judgment about whether the player got a concussion or not. Then the third step, it's called the Madden rule, because John Madden, the legendary coach, proposed it. He says that if there's a suspicion of a concussion, then the player needs to go to the locker room immediately. And this is, again, a liability thing for the NFL. If the player then, step 4, is diagnosed with a concussion, then they cannot come back the same day to continue playing the game. But if the player passes these concussion exams, then they are allowed to come back. And this is the dangerous part. They are allowed to come back into the game if they're able to pass these tests. Okay? So this is at the professional level. Let me talk a little bit about the collegiate and high school level. So on the left is the data for the top 5 sports in universities here in the US that get concussions, and this is normalized by athletic exposures, or the number of plays and number of games. So wrestling is number 1. Men's ice hockey is number 2. Women's ice hockey is 3. Football is number 4. You may have thought that was number 1. And then women's soccer is number 5. So the reason women's soccer is up there is because women are really aggressive on the field. Okay? Only on the field. They're just so aggressive, so competitive. But also the headers, when they hit the ball with their head, just physiologically, just the fact that their necks are slightly thinner than the male necks gives them less support to absorb the shock. Okay, so that's on the college side. The data on the right shows on the high school level. They're even monitoring concussions now. So none of those will surprise you except maybe the last one, cheerleading. Okay? Well, it turns out cheerleaders don't have any protection. So they're out there doing tumbles and flips and getting thrown up in the air, but they're doing it on hardwood floor or concrete. And what happens when a cheerleader falls is they have very little protection, right? And so we've seen a lot more instances of concussions in cheerleaders. So this is even more of a concern is, well, you know, football, yes, it gets all the attention because they're out there hitting each other, but they have protection. and they have medical help. In fact, in a professional football game in the United States, for the NFL, there are over 20 physicians in a single game. Okay, in a college football game, there are at least 4. In a high school game, maybe there is 1. Maybe. And we hope that they have the right training. Okay, so now you've seen all the data, let me get into the app a little bit more so you can get a better sense of what we were trying to do to solve this issue of reporting. So this is our design team. I'll start from the left. Lifshitz, the gentleman on the left, he's a neuroscientist. Then there's me, and then to my left, moving from left to right, is Jeff Stone. I talk about him because he's a psychologist. And his contribution to the group was more about, are we generating the right behavior through the app? The gentleman at the head of the table, that's Jason Sweet. He's a special teams player for Arizona football. And I'm going to talk about him because he's also a former pararescue jumper, special forces member in the military. Then there's Hirsch Handmaker. He's a radiologist. And then next to him is Scooby Wright, also a football player at Arizona and was drafted to the NFL and now plays for the Arizona Cardinals. And then the last 2 gentlemen are the app developers, the programmers who help bring all our crazy ideas and actually code it into something that was usable. Okay? So let me talk about the end users a little bit more. So I mentioned these gentlemen, they were sitting at the table with us. Scooby Wright, the gentleman on the left, he's a defensive player, okay, and his job is to hit people. That's how he makes his money. And he had a very good career, obviously good enough to get drafted to the NFL, and now he's a linebacker for the Arizona Cardinals. So a linebacker is somebody whose job is to try to figure out where the ball is going to go. Is it going to be a pass? Is it going to be a run? And they just try to hit the person with the ball as hard as they can. That's how they make their money, okay? So you can imagine Scooby has had a few concussions, okay? And then the gentleman on the right, it turns out before Jason Sweet came to the University of Arizona, he was in the military for about 4 years as a pararescue jumper. And this particular job, obviously you're parachuting frequently, but it turns out you get a lot of concussions as a pararescue jumper because you're hitting the ground coming down in a parachute. So he had already experienced this in the military sense, and now his job on the football field was to also hit people. He was in special teams. Special teams is a player whose job is during a play like a kickoff to try to tackle the person with the ball. So again, these are very strong and tough guys. I mean, they're pretty intimidating with all their tattoos and muscles, but they also have experienced a lot of concussions themselves. So this was a perfect group of end users for us because they taught us a lot about what concussions look like and feel like. And so what we started with is writing down a set of use cases. And so we asked these 2 players, tell me about when you got a concussion and what it was like if you can remember it, right? So Scooby Wright sat us down and explained a situation where he was a punt returner, very similar to the one where the video that I just showed you. He was a punt returner. He had already had a concussion that game, so he could barely see the ball. But because he was the best player on his team, the coach put him out there and said, your job is to catch this punt and try to score a touchdown, run it back and try to score a touchdown. And he was telling us that he was seeing 2 or 3 footballs in the air. There's really only one coming his way, but there were 2 or 3 that he was seeing, and he was hoping to be able to catch both of them, or all 3, and not create a fumble for his team. And we thought, that's the perfect scenario for us to try to replicate in this virtual reality environment. So that's what we hung our hat on in terms of trying to replicate something that's actually happened to somebody, and then symptoms that actually are realistic in terms of a real football game. So I want to talk a little bit more about some of the design features, but before I go into that, I want to actually show you the app. So I just plugged in my my iPhone into this viewer. This is something that you could get at Walmart or Target for $20. And I want to show you, let's see. I want to show you what the app looks like. And you're not going to be able to see it in virtual reality. I'm going to be seeing it in 3D. You're just going to be seeing it in 2D up on the screen. Okay? So let's launch this thing, see if it works. Oh, it was already open. Okay. Doesn't want to open. That's what happens when you do demos, right? Live demos. I've got a couple of workarounds. So the trick might be to unplug it and then plug it back in. Okay, so this is what the app looks like when you start. Of course, we want to list the symptoms so that the user actually gets a little bit of information before they start experiencing them. Now, again, if you get a concussion, you may only experience one or multiple symptoms. So it's hard to predict that because of the complexity of concussions in general. Then, of course, we have our warning, please don't use this while driving or operating heavy machinery, etc. Okay, so here we go. Then we are in the VR mode. And let me just give you a sense. So this is the actual football field at the University of Arizona. You see the scoreboard there. Nice 100-degree day in Tucson. Okay. So what we do is we give a little bit of information so that the player can get a sense of, okay, there was a day, it's awful to say, when a guy stumbling off the field was a funny thing. There were a lot of things that had no place in the game. Now, this is the coach that's giving me instructions on what to do. So the first instruction is strap up your helmet, get ready to return some punts. Now the kicker is there in the distance. You might see a little red dot. Can you see the red dot in the middle of the image? That's my guide of where my actual focus is. And then you have this other player on the left. Who do you think that is? That's the guy that's going to hit me. So the game is rigged. I'm going to get hit no matter what. Let's go. Okay, so it says gaze over here. When you're ready to practice, I'll start kicking after you press the button. Okay, so I get a couple of practice tries. All right. I'm in the zone now. Let's do one more. Okay. So, nice hands. Thank you. So now this is full contact. No fair catches. What a fair catch is when you wave your arm up in the air and say, please don't tackle me. I'm just going to sit here and not run. But that's not gonna make this game interesting. Okay, this one's for real. Pay attention to this player on the left, okay? He's going to come and pay me a visit in just a little bit. Okay, I'm receiving the ball, I catch it, and okay, all right. How do I feel? I feel great. Here's the decision point. What do I want to do about it? Do I want to talk to a trainer or put me back in, coach? What should I do? Put me back in. Good decision. Okay, I'm already feeling a little bit dizzy. The world is moving around me, and I'm going to get hit again. How do I feel? I feel great. Put me back in, coach. Okay, I'm doing this on purpose so you can see all the symptoms start to accumulate. Okay, I got it. Yes, thank you. Okay, all right. Now I'm feeling really good. Oh. Put me back in. Yep, there's 5 of them. Bang. Okay, so I've got a couple. I've got double vision, I got blurred vision, I got light sensitivity, I have delayed reaction time. How do I feel? I want to talk to a trainer. So what happens is now I enter the concussion protocol, and I'm given the opportunity then to rest for a few days. And what happens is almost every person that we put this in front of, football player, wants to experience to see truly if they are realistic, right? So let me talk about some of the things that you saw and why you saw them. Okay, so let me talk about some of the things that we deliberately put into the app that were important to us. The first one was that we wanted it to be real in terms of the current state of college football. So naturally, we made the scenario live in a real football field, real football stadium, and you couldn't hear the audio, but in the background there's a crowd cheering, even though the stadium is empty. And then the fight song is playing. And you can hear some of the referee whistles as well. So all of that we recorded in a real football game. What the football players told us is that the coach was important, and the race of the coach is important. So originally we had an African-American coach, which we thought, hey, why not, right? There's a lot of African-American players, maybe they relate to African-American coach, and the first thing that the players told us is no. Most coaches are Caucasian. You need to put a Caucasian coach to make it look realistic. So okay, we changed the skin color of the coach. We didn't think that was really a big deal, but the feedback we got from the players is this needs to match reality. The other thing is, if you notice the hands in the image, the gloves, that's really important because our first attempt at putting the hands in front of the player, we had put the hands out like this, almost like a basket catch, like you're catching something in front of you. And the football players told us, like, nobody ever catches that way. They catch this way, especially when something is up in the air. So we even got this wrong initially. And we thought that was a subtle and insignificant point, but they told us, no, you got to move the hands in the opposite direction. And then the name of the app too, we initially had called it something really generic and not really that interesting, but then the football players came up with the name Brain Gains with a Z. And the reason why this was much more relatable for them is because when they go to the gym and lift weights, they say they are making gains. Obviously muscular gains, physical gains, and they thought, hey, if you're doing something to help your brain, maybe you're doing something that's giving you brain gains or brain benefits. And we thought, okay, that's kind of hip. We'll go with that. The other idea is being immersive. This is the version with the African-American coach. We scrapped that because they told us that was not realistic. But making it immersive, I talked about the fight song, I talked about the football stadium, but creating the scenario from a real image is what was important to us. So not a computer-generated environment, but this is actually real photography from a real football stadium, and you can look around 360 degrees. Now, I think eventually we would want the football player to be able to walk around and run and maybe try to avoid the tackler. That was a little bit more complex. So for this version of the app, the football player that's receiving the ball is static. They cannot move. and the game is rigged, you're going to get hit, because that is the point. We want you to experience the symptoms. But making it immersive was not just visual, but it was also auditory. Now, I talked a little bit about the symptoms, and you saw them in my simulation, my demonstration. There are many symptoms of a concussion. Like I said, some of them are just not really good candidates for virtual reality because we don't want people experiencing vertigo or depression or throwing up. There are some really easy ones. This is blurred vision. You can still sort of see, but the world looks a little fuzzy around you. Okay? And the feedback that we got from football players who had experienced concussions is that often you get 2 or 3 of these symptoms at the same time. So blurred vision was an easy one to program and a common one that was experienced in real concussions. Double vision is another one. This is where you start seeing multiple footballs coming your way. And then when these things get stacked on top of each other, it makes it even more interesting. Another thing that we did deliberately was medical realism. In other words, is this actually what a concussion looks like, medically speaking? Not just is it real for the football players, but is it accurate medically? And what was important to us is being able to generate the reaction from the players. So what we did is create a scenario that when you get hit, you'll see the gentleman on the right reacts immediately. They sort of this reaction of like, wow, I felt that. That was impactful. I'm going to play that again. As soon as he gets hit, you kick back just a little bit and you realize, whoa, that felt real. And the whole point was to generate this emotional reaction of, hey, I can now associate a physical event. It was just a simulation of it, but I can associate a physical event to a concussion symptom. Okay? And now that I understand, oh, you know what? I probably did have a concussion that one time that I played, or last week, or yesterday. Okay, so it was important for us, and we tested this with a lot of different people to see if we would get that emotional reaction of, wow, I just got hit. It was done virtually, but I can now translate that emotional connection from the virtual world to the real world. Some more information about or some more details about how we attempted this sport realism idea. The coach was actually modeled after a real person. The players were modeled after our end users. We actually digitally scanned each person and put them in uniform because we didn't want it to be just a generic avatar that nobody had ever seen. We wanted these people to be modeled after real humans, so that was another important part. The design of the gloves was even important for us. Nowadays in American football and television, you see some very fancy designs on gloves, and we wanted to kind of capture that in our design. So again, it would feel like, hey, this is a real football game, this is a real football player, the position of the hands, getting that right. And also taking the footage, this is what the camera sees when you put it on a drone, taking this footage and making it into a virtual environment that is driven from a real football stadium, not something that's computer generated. So this actually took us a lot more money and time than we were expecting, but it was worth it because we know that even though making something real is difficult, it is necessary if you want to generate these emotional responses. Okay, so far I've only thought of the system as an engineer and as a neuroscientist. I want to talk a little bit about the psychology part of the design because I think this is an important angle to all this. So there's this concept in psychology called social norm marketing. And what social norm marketing is that it gives you information about a subset of the population that you identify with. Like the example on the left, it might be college students. So the stat may be 82% of MU students did not smoke pot last month. Again, we have to speak to our audience here. I pick something that our end users are interested in. And if you are a student at this university and you see this statistic, you think, wow, you know, I want to be like everybody else. You want to fit into this social group. And if you hear, and the statistic has to be true. You can't just make it up, of course, because that would not be called social norm marketing. That would be called something else, right? But the idea is, hey, I want to affiliate myself with this group if I'm a student at this university, and maybe I should think twice about my actions. Because if my actions don't fit what the rest of the group does, then I'm going to be considered an outsider, okay? So our concept of how we use this with concussions is similar to what you see on the right. You give somebody information that's true, and you say, hey, it's better to miss one game than the whole season. You give them facts, you give them statistics about what your particular social group does, and that also helps supplement what they're experiencing in the app. So we were coming up with statements like, football players who report concussions immediately return to play 3 times faster than those who don't, right? Again, based on real data, based on real information, that way, what they've already experienced in VR gets supplemented by these social norm marketing messages, and then they begin to realize, hey, you know what? Even though I may be considered weak by reporting the concussion, it may actually benefit me a lot more. So we found that messaging to be powerful, but then we found the messaging of peer reporting to be equally powerful. In other words, if you see a teammate get a concussion, peer reporting is also a very important tool, because we want your team to win. You don't want somebody on the team who's had a concussion, who's not performing at 100%, to be on the field. Okay? So the idea was, can we also motivate peer reporting? So we developed these messages and put them around the locker room and around the gym at the football stadium, so that football players could see them, and they were all supporting this idea of what they're experiencing in the app. It's like, now you've experienced, now you've made this association. Here's a way for you to fit into the rest of the social group. Another design feature, which is probably very obvious for those of you who know VR and have heard of Google Cardboard, is that we wanted to do something at low cost, right? And fortunately, because of the processing power of these cell phones now, you can do VR in a mobile way. I mean, before this, you had to do virtual reality in a cave, in a large, dedicated room. Raytheon has a really nice one down in Arizona. It's probably costs millions of dollars, right? And you can do a lot of things there. But now you can do it on a phone that costs, less than $1,000. That 99% of college students have one of these in their pocket, and so the expense really becomes the viewer. And mine is a little bit fancier than the normal one that you can buy online, but you can get these made out of cardboard for about $4 now. So that makes it scalable. That makes it low cost. And then the only other thing is just making it iOS, Android compatible. I don't know anybody who does Windows phones anymore. Maybe the 2% of the population does. But you can cover 98% of the population by making it Android and iOS compatible. Okay, so those are the design features. Let me talk a little bit about some of the unintended consequences, because that will give you some more insight in terms of where we're going with this. What we found when we saw football players using the app and giving us feedback is that they told us that they actually wanted their parents and their athletic trainers to use the app. Because it turns out a lot of the stigma and a lot of the social pressures to get back in the game, even after you've been hurt, comes from parents. And this is especially true at the younger levels. I'm sure nobody in this audience has gone to a game and yelled at umpires or players, but I'm just saying, theoretically, this is the demographic parents that probably know the least in terms of what a concussion is, but actually have the most influence in terms of whether a player gets treated, whether a player goes back into the game. And so what we're actually going to try to do is create a version of this for parents, so that parents can experience what a concussion looks like, and parents can learn what the concussion protocol is like, and they can now be better informed and decide whether their athlete, their child, should stay in the game or not. And this is not just for football. Women's soccer is the next target, right? Because of the exposure and some of the data that you saw. So that was a really neat unintended consequence. It's not just the football players who are our audience, but it's the parents as well who help inform some of those decisions. Another unintended consequence has to do with what's called heads-up football. Heads-up football is a new program that's being funded by an organization called USA Football, which most people may not have heard of, but you have heard of their main sponsor, the NFL. Okay? The NFL funds this nonprofit to promote football, the growth of football in middle school and high school. And so what Heads Up Football has done is they've created, they've changed the rules of how you should tackle. So instead of the traditional way of tackling by using your head as the spear, now they're saying you bear hug somebody. You're facing them, and at that stage is when you can tackle them. So it's more like you're hugging them instead of hitting them with your helmet. Now, they've already had pilot studies for a couple years, and they've shown that the number of concussions has been reduced for leagues who use heads-up football. If you tackle with your head as a spear, you get a penalty or you get ejected from the game. I mean, it's that serious. But ultimately, what they have to do is they have to convince the mothers around America on whether this is something that they want their kids to do or not. So they're targeting mothers because they know moms are the decision makers in whether a child plays football or not. So our conversations with Heads Up Football were around the idea of creating a virtual reality app where you're actually tackling correctly. Because the tendency may be for you to use your head as a spear, so that means that you're looking down, but they want to correct that, and they want you to be able to tackle by looking at somebody and forcing you to hug them. And so in VR, that's very easy to do because your movement and the head movement is tracked in real time. And so the idea for us was to create a training app for football players, coaches, referees, parents to actually practice tackling people this way so that they're out on the field. They now have a more natural instinct to how to position their head. Okay, so now the final unintended consequence, which I think is important to mention, is translating to another public health problem, which is smoking cessation. One of my fellow researchers at the University of Arizona works in this area. She saw our demo and saw how we were trying to influence behavior through this virtual reality app. And she came up to me and said, hey, why don't we do the same thing but for smokers? And I thought, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. What's the connection, right? She said, the idea behind smoking cessation is to give somebody the triggers and the craving to try to want to try to smoke, but then also give them an outlet to distract themselves long enough so that the craving goes away. And then give themselves the ability to train this particular cycle, craving and then distraction, craving and then distraction in VR. And the idea, her hypothesis is that if we do this for smokers, you'll have a very positive impact in terms of the reduction of smoking, because you train yourself to see that trigger and then distract yourself from the trigger. So it's, again, a kind of a merger of engineering, psychology, and public health in a way that tries to help address a public health problem. Okay, I'm going to leave enough time for questions, but I just want to say that the ultimate measure of success for what I just talked about in the last 40 minutes, the ultimate measure of success of this app is are we increasing the reporting rate of concussions? That's what we care about. Now, I don't care if we are decreasing the number of concussions, because that's a function of something else. What I care about is, are we increasing the reporting rate of concussions? Now, you may argue, well, that means that you're going to see a lot more concussions reported, and that may actually lead people to believe that there are more concussions taking place, right? That's actually maybe the wrong conclusion, but probably one that we'd like to see. More concussions being reported there, so that as a result, people can get the care that they need in order to return to play, and in some cases, as college students, return to learn. Okay? So again, let me review the 5 points that I covered at the beginning. I think from the data that I showed you, hopefully you're convinced that concussions is one of the new public health problems. It's a lot harder to diagnose and treat because it's not a visible injury. It's not something that you see blood, or you don't see the swelling unless you get a brain scan. From the end user involvement, obviously we got football players. They're a lot smarter than most people think, right? They're college educated football players that had a lot of experience, and in one case, he had military experience as well, and that was extremely helpful in contextualizing what we were doing. The socio-technical system part, again, looking at the technology and the humans and how they're interacting with each other. The social norm marketing was really the link that helped strengthen what we were doing. You put the VR goggles down, and what do you do next? Well, you see these messages around you that we are reinforcing the way that we want you to think and we want you to behave. The realism part, it was difficult. We spent a lot of money and time trying to make this app real. It does feel like a game, but it's a game that mirrors a real football scenario. From scanning the players to putting the fight song to digitizing the images of the stadium. That was money very well spent, because then it felt real and it felt like something that was impactful for the user. And then from the unintended consequences, I hope that forces you to think as well, what are the things that you may not be able to anticipate about how the users or potential new user group might come into the things that you're designing and architecting in your own work. Where we want to go from here with the Brain Gains app is to actually do a controlled study, to give a football team, a college football team, use of the app and see whether reporting rates increase during a season. And at the same time, have a control group that doesn't get the app and just see what their reporting rates look like over the season. And in fact, we can even mix the interventions some more. Social norm marketing idea, we can maybe give one team all these messages about the benefits of reporting concussions, and then not give another team and just monitor that control group and see whether their reporting rates are stable or whether they change over time. Again, so that we can understand whether what we're doing is even making a difference or not. Now, that's a good handoff to the next group of researchers who have to resolve this issue of, now that somebody reports a concussion, what do you do about it? How do you treat it? Okay? How do you diagnose it? And how do you make the sport safer than it is now? Because even though this is the most popular sport in the United States in terms of revenue and viewership, the participation rate is declining amongst youth leagues dramatically. In Arizona alone, the enrollment for Pop Warner, the young player, middle school age football, declined by 50%. Okay, and so that should get a lot of people in the professional leagues worried that there's going to be a smaller pool of football players available unless there's some sort of dramatic rule change in the future. So just taking a small bite out of the apple in terms of this big public health problem, but hopefully you took some ideas away on how this maybe relates to the work that you're doing, and hopefully we can have a lively Q&A session. If anybody wants to come up and get a concussion, I'd be happy to give you one. And again, this is a software architecture challenge, right? But it's not just about the technology. It's about how the technology is used in the context of these particular this particular audience and the social stigma around this particular public health problem. So I hope that was beneficial to you. Thank you very much.
We have time for questions.
Have you thought of scaling it or applying it to other positions within football? Like Mike Webster was a center. So I know a lot of the lineman experience, and maybe that situation or scenario isn't so realistic to them, maybe applying it to some of the other positions?
Yeah, absolutely. The center is head-on collision every play, right? So we thought about running backs and wide receivers in particular as some of the other perspectives that we can bring in. But the challenge is making a virtual reality app where you can move is much more complex than what we did, where the player is standing still. So it was a trade-off that we had to make in terms of money and time. What's more important to us, that the player move or that the player be in a realistic environment? So just to give you an idea, the funding we got from the NCAA was $100,000. So that's what you see coming out of it. If I had $1 million, I would do what you just said.
Okay, I have a question. What type of responses have you gotten from coaches? Because a lot of pressure, coaches tend to pressure the players a lot more, and it affects their player pool. So what type of responses have you gotten?
Yeah, that's a tougher audience because coaches are financially incentivized to win. That's their metric. And a lot of times they're willing to sacrifice an individual player's health to improve the team's likelihood to win. So that is probably the toughest audience after the parental influence. Some coaches really like it because many of them were football players themselves. So the few coaches that had tried this really liked it. Some of them weren't really interested at all. Because they're in this really weird situation where they want to optimize their own metric, which is to win, a lot of times at the sacrifice of other metrics, which is their players' health. So that is, until they change the incentives for coaches, we're going to have a difficult time with them.
I agree with getting at mothers. I'm so happy that I pulled my 9-year-old daughter from travel soccer after first season, but my question is a technical one. So you mentioned all these new opportunities that are coming. How much of the app you have will be reused, or will it require to be redesigned because of the particularities of the user interaction and that environment? So what part of it goes into that reality of the virtual environment, and what part of it is a lot of the iOS and those parts of the system?
Yeah, so what I showed you is very much a prototype, as you could tell by the fact that it crashed as I was trying to open it. And I would say this is one of those situations where you throw out the first pancake and you kind of start over when you have real funding to do a larger and more complex virtual reality game. I would say the only reusable parts of what we've done are the virtual reality environment, the stadium itself, and maybe some of the avatars. But the actual functioning of the game, I think we would have to rebuild it from scratch, because if you're making decisions about, like, does a player move, do you change perspectives, you have to operate with completely different architectural assumptions there. And then if you move to a different sport, you have to start all over from there as well, because if you move to soccer, for instance, well, we'd have to go to a soccer stadium and film, maybe put cameras GoPro cameras on soccer players' foreheads, and then they go up for a header, and then we capture that information on what it looks like from their perspective. So it's a completely different vantage point. So a little bit of reuse, but what's important for us is like the knowledge that we've gained from developing, right? And I think that's probably the biggest savings is now we know what a realistic storyline can look like. And now we know what the important features of the game in terms of the hand positioning and the face mask, and that's really what's going to lead us to doing something that's useful the next round.
You said that your goal was to increase the number of concussions.
Correct.
So how do you gauge what the baseline is for the number of actual
Concussions reported or concussions?
that exist?
Okay, so we have that data because a lot of the Division I NCAA football programs are part of a national database now where they're tracking the number of concussions. So that's before any intervention. We already know what the average number is per team, so we would use that as our baseline.
Is there another aspect that you could simulate where the perspectives of the person looking at a player experiencing a concussion and what that looks like and how to interpret that?
Yeah, that would be very interesting. Like to watch somebody get a concussion, that would be very interesting. And deciding whether you report it, maybe, so that peer reporting thing. Or maybe you have like an out-of-body experience and you come out of your concussion and you see yourself. I don't know. Yeah, there are a lot of opportunities there. Yeah, so changing the perspective, I think, is very powerful because maybe that's where the shortfall is in a lot of cases. You see an event happening, but you didn't experience the event directly. How do you react to it? I think that's a great idea. I think I would need a couple more $1 million to pull that one off.
Hey.
All right. Well, thank you, Ricardo.
Yeah, thank you.